Wanted to get on this topic of, well, I didn't write a title, I guess, kind of talking about ancient religions, how they kind of evolved into more modern day religions, um, and kind of like the aspect of like how control has kind of developed more in modern religions. Um, I don't know how much I'll get into like cults like on the other extreme, having like really controlling aspects to them. Uh, but yeah, so I've been back to studying a bit about Norse paganism, um, and heathenry, and Christianity, kind of like the combination of things. A lot of this came up for me over the past few days. You know, one of my friends was, uh, you know, picking my brain. We're kind of like talking about the Quran and about Islam a little bit. He's not Muslim, but he recently finished reading the Quran and he remembered that I had read it. But I mean, I read it so long ago that I didn't have like a lot of detailed um, comments, just things that I remembered from like, this is well over 10 years ago now, probably close to 20 years ago that I read the Quran. So it's like, and it's not like I read it again. And unless I'm studying something specific about Islam, I usually, or like Muslim culture, I don't, or subcultures, I usually don't go back into the Quran too much, but I know it's there. Um, I try not to be too turned off by different books. I kind of understand as a whole that religion, when they're writing, there's usually an agenda in mind. Usually the agenda is, this is the best way to live. Let's look at how things are supposed to be done according to this way of living and why we aren't promoting some other way of living. Like, what is the downfall of that versus the benefit of this? I'm not talking about Islam specifically, but I feel like most religious texts that I've come across or heard about, they're usually not like, oh yeah, go be like any religion, but we're just writing this book. It's here if you want it, but go ahead and do anything else you want. Usually, I feel like things get written to preserve the information and to have some kind of clarity for people to like organize around an idea, usually, right? Like, I mean, there are religions that exist and different cultures and beliefs that exist with like oral histories and traditions, and um, a lot of times too, even just because something's written, it doesn't really make it better. I don't want to judge it from my Western perspective and be like, oh, like this is a better form of like, you know, getting your point across than, ancient, oral storytelling traditions and things like that. Like, not every culture has like writing, and that's fine, but it's it's hard to come across material if there's no writing about it. You have to actually talk to the people, right? So that's one thing. And then another thing is, um, when somebody's writing something, like there is kind of like, sometimes there's flexibility. What I've noticed, there's like this flexibility of like, you know, like take the Christian English Bible for example. Like, there's so many different versions and editions of whatever type of Bible a person has a preference for. Some people care for accuracy, some people care for being able to like explain the concepts of the stories and not maybe the details. Some people want it directly translated from the originals. the very early originals versus like the originals that are kind of like some newer manuscripts were maybe found, some extra scrolls were found later on, or something like, you know, in some groups, you know, like I think especially about like Islam and Judaism, you know, they have, you know, original texts in, you know, biblical Hebrew for Jews, and for Muslims it's in Arabic. You know, the actual written original usually will stay, well, at least in tradition, will stay side by side with the English or with whatever language translation. They try to keep it so it's like this is side by side, so we can't say you're like twisting all this. But there's still, not everybody's on the same page even with that, you know, happening, as like, you know, I guess to, you know, conserve some form of accuracy or tradition, so it doesn't get changed over time to something else. It's like this is originally the first way it was written. And so, well, not really. I think the Bible had, I don't think Hebrew was the first language. I could be wrong about that. Um, I have to look that up because I kind of always assumed it was, but now that I think about it, I'm like, was it? Because I know the New Testament wasn't originally written in Hebrew. I think it was written in Greek, but there were other things to consider as well. So I don't really know. I'd have to look more into like the language history. But anyways, when it comes to like ancient cultures, you know, like in anthropology classes, a lot of times you'll hear about culture. You'll hear about, you know, you start learning about cultures and just kind of what a lot of cultures have in common. It's not uncommon for a culture to have a religion, even if everybody doesn't practice it, but like a set of like religions in the area. Like, for example, the US, you could technically say there's probably somebody of almost every religion living in the country, but a lot of them you don't hear about or know about. Like, if you ask me where's the closest temple of like a certain kind, like, I don't think I could point you in the right direction. Like, I think in LA there's like this Hindu temple, um, in Malibu. It's not far from the Self Realization Temple, but I don't know exactly where. Like, I don't know if it's like Pacific Palisades. I can't remember what area, but somewhere over there. Um, and then there's another area that's, I don't freaking know. It was like, um, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think in Linda Vista, there's a lot of, I don't know if they're Thai temples. You know, there's quite a few that I've kind of run into kind of around. And then, you know, like, I mean, I couldn't point you to a mosque in San Diego. Like, I don't think I know where one is off the top of my head. Over near, I don't know what area it's called, but like, kind of not too far from UCSD, there's like this gigantic Mormon temple over there. And then, you know, there's all sorts of places, you know, around, but those aren't the only religions, like, in the cities. You know, there's plenty of other religions that people have, but I feel like some have a higher presence, you know, in there. I couldn't tell you where a pagan place of worship is because I don't know. And I guess maybe that conversation with my friend about Islam a little bit, and about the Quran. Mostly it was about the Quran, but and then a little bit of, you know, going to this metal festival and seeing some people dressed kind of maybe in attire that reminded me of like Norse pagan attire. Like I saw someone that had some tattoos that I was wondering, like maybe they are actually a a Norse pagan practicing person. I wasn't sure, but I was like, I saw the hair. It was like in like these pretty thick locks, kind of like tied back, and had like a certain type of necklace on and a certain type of like I don't know. It could have just been attire because I was at a metal festival, and that is something that comes up. Is there is this kind of like Viking era type of vibe with some people, and there is something that I noticed of an overlap of that kind of music that comes out of like Germany and some other countries in Europe, some other Scandinavian countries and stuff that I've noticed with the music. Um, I've really kind of found some similarities in it, and there's some groups, some bands that I'm blanking on the name of this band, but there's this band I really want to see that I got introduced, not to them necessarily, but started to hear about them through this Norse pagan guy. His channel was called Wisdom of Odin. I hadn't been on there for a pretty long time, and now it looks like his channel is called Jacob Todson. I think he changed his channel name to brand it to his own name, I guess. Um, and yeah, in a lot of his episodes, a he gives a um, he has a song at the beginning where he's um, I guess talking about whatever the topic is, but usually there's this band that he is really into, that he uses a lot of their music for the intros to his videos. I'm trying to look up the name of the band. Let me see. Heilung? I think that's it. I don't know if that's how you say it. Heilung? Heilung. Heilung. I don't really know how to say it, but I think that's the name of the band or group. Um, it's a modern pagan folk band. I kind of want to see them because I hear a little bit of their music, and it's like it kind of reminds me of like it's. It reminds me of like when I listen to like intros of like metal albums like Avenged Sevenfold and things like that, where I'm just like, whoa, this is um pretty, deep, um like pretty intense sounding music. But that kind of music, when I was at the festival, I started thinking about it when I saw that guy and the people he was with. They all kind of had, like, I think he was with one other person that kind of looked like they kind of had a theme going on with their attire, and their hairstyles and things. And sometimes, people just have like a form of a costume on. Sometimes it actually is a form of regalia that they're wearing. Sometimes they actually, like, I'm talking about when people go to concerts, especially like metal concerts where there's metal and stuff like that. Like in rock music, people dress a certain way according to the genre or sub genre, whatever you want to call it. And you kind of see people's clothing styles, and you're like, okay, this person's into rockabilly. Okay, this person's into like 80s punk. Okay, this person's into like new metal. This person's into like whatever. Like there's all these different um, ways that people can dress that makes them look like they're into a certain type of thing, and sometimes it's a little hard when there's overlap with stuff. It's like, what are they, like, are they representing their actual culture? Like, I guess this isn't the same topic, but this kind of comes up with like indigenous North American groups where, people have I don't know what you call it, but there's like a type of regalia where there's like a feather headdress and like maybe like a breastplate and all these types of like attire that people in the past at EDM festivals have worn that type of attire. And then at a certain point, people started calling it out and being like, it's like a form of cultural appropriation, and it's really not okay to be like wearing other people's, traditional cultural garb, without being a part of that culture. Um, and so I think in my times going to EDM festivals, I've only seen two people, and they looked like they knew each other because they were walking around together, and they were wearing like these big headdresses and stuff. They didn't outwardly look to be like any type of indigenous, like North American group, but I don't know their heritage. I don't know these people. They could have just looked like how they look, and totally been like whatever culture it is. And that's between them and their own situation and their own, I try not to be like, I feel like when people do stuff like that, they're not intentionally trying to be like doing something. They're not like, I'm going to put on this and like make fun of this culture of people and wear this. It's not like they're like, okay, I made up a play and I'm wearing blackface or something. Like, it's not like that. Like, it's not like outwardly like racist or something, but it's also not um it's also not too um like, it's easy to offend, and it's, I think it's kind of hard for people of different cultures to understand, because it's one thing to wear it and feel like, oh, like somebody looks beautiful wearing this attire, it looks nice, like there's this African American lady on YouTube who does videos on of her experience living in Japan, and sometimes she takes photo shoots in certain areas in the city, it looks like, and she'll be wearing a kimono or like something like that. And people stop and they say, "Oh, she looks beautiful," and they kind of say like, "Oh, you look nice." Like you'll see a lot of elderly people stopping to talk to her and like, "Oh, you look really good," But she's not walking around like making like a weird fake accent and like making fun of Japanese culture. It would be different if it's like somebody's dressing like a culture and then they're like at the same time like making fun of it and like doing all kinds of like weird little things to make it seem like a joke or something. It's kind of a really sensitive line, I think, for a lot of different cultures. um like if I saw someone who didn't look like they were African or who didn't look like they were black and they were just like wearing like an afro and like some kind of different African colors and some beads and maybe like, I don't know, they wouldn't have to have a daishiki, but maybe a daishiki or some kind of like traditional looking like kente kind of looking cloth and stuff like that, and then like walking around like faking an accent and like kind of like doing little mannerisms like to make a joke or something, I'd be like, what is this person doing? You know what I mean? But it's like, it's a fine line. So like, I don't really know a person's situation when they go and put on those types of clothing. I don't really know what they're actually doing it for, and I'm not gonna like be like, oh, excuse me, like, are you, what culture are you? And like, like, I don't know these people. So I just, you know, I feel like sometimes people do it innocently because they think it's fun and they're in the moment and they're having fun and they're thinking about their experience. They're not thinking about, is this offensive or is this something that we're phasing out in society? I think that's something that has been kind of more recently phased out. That it's like, we kind of all, most of us, I feel like, got the memo. Some people maybe didn't get the memo, you know? Um, so they don't really know that that's not acceptable as much anymore. But I feel like with some other cultures, people aren't really going to be too sensitive about it too much. And usually you don't see other people that aren't like Caucasian looking people wearing like Viking, like Norse type of Viking looking attire. Too much, too much. I mean, when Halloween comes around, you see all kinds of things, but I'm just saying on a day to day, there aren't really that many places, at least that I know of, where people would be wearing those types of things. I mean, maybe in Europe, they might have events in Europe that might be different. And I know that in Europe, I did hear a person who actually was of Norse background, and that was their ancient, the religion was part of their ancient heritage and things like that. And there was kind of this debate between, can you like convert to Norse paganism, or is it something that like is part of your actual bloodline heritage, and you're like, I'm claiming this because this is where my people are from, you know. Like if I say that like I have ancestry that's Zulu, that's different than somebody else saying that they, you know, like wearing the stuff and saying like, you know, they, oh, I know about the culture or whatever, but it's like, you know, whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a little bit different, but it's touchy for some people. I don't know. I go back and forth between stuff because I'm like, I'm not one to try to want to offend people, but at the same time, it's like, it can be easy to be offensive just by talking about this stuff. It's like, I feel like I have to go so long out of my way to like make so many disclaimers about so many different things so it doesn't come across like, oh, I missed this one area, and then it's like, like nobody's coming at me about it, but I'm just saying like, I feel that way. I'm like, oh, I don't want to assume that like I'm not considering this one type of scenario or whatever. And I still don't really say every single detail of everything I want to cover. And yeah, so basically, when it comes to ancient religions, there seems to be this time period that I haven't fully studied, but there seems to be this time period pre-Christianity, and pre-Islam, where religion seemed a little bit different. There wasn't a lot of like converting. Like, I'm not saying people didn't convert, that they didn't, you know, go and like have wars and all these kind of things, but I think, and I could be wrong, but I feel like Judaism, if you look at the I don't know if evolution is the right word, but how, you know, things evolved, like there were basically, according to the Bible, there were groups of people, you know, that were being persecuted from a certain lineage. Pre-Egypt, you know, there was something happening where there was this, you know, lineage of people coming from, you know, the bloodline of I guess it's kind of confusing to see who the bloodline really came through, because I mean, if Cain was banished, right, and then Abel was Cain was banished, and then Abel was killed by Cain. Those are the only actual children of Eve that were mentioned in the Bible, right? I mean, you know, scholars are always saying like, oh, there were more, there were more. And I mean, it makes logical sense. There had to be more. Adam and Eve couldn't have just like done it all themselves, populated the world like completely all by themselves. Like there had to be something going on there that was more than just, you know, Cain and Abel. It wasn't like, okay, there was Adam, then there was Eve, then there was Cain and Abel, and then that's the end of, you know, human existence. Like, that's not really how it goes. But let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to search something while I'm talking. I feel like I'm so foggy on so many things. Okay. So, sorry, I'm like looking at this Bible, at these chapters. I want to look at something and mention something. I just gotta scroll a lot. Okay, so after the murder of Cain, okay. Oh, I was wrong. So even though Cain got banished, and he settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden, the lineage goes Cain and his wife conceived and bore Enoch. And so, yeah, the lineage comes through Cain. I mean, obviously, it wouldn't have come through anyone else, but it's like, yeah, from Cain, you get names like Methuselah, Lamech, and then it says Adam's descendants to Noah and his sons. And so kind of that lineage from Seth, all the way down to pretty much, Noah, that had Shem, Ham, and Japheth, I don't know how to pronounce the names, as his sons. But yeah, like, when you look at that lineage, like, what I'm trying to say is look at that time period in modern day Judaism, right? Modern day Judaism is a lot more organized, right? It's not just people out, in the desert that are like, oh, we're part of this lineage from Cain and on. And, yeah, that's not really how it goes. It's not like, oh, we're part of this lineage from Cain and on. And, like, back then in the Bible, other than sacrificing and praying and things like that, I feel like you don't see much about Jewish culture, about how to live, about how they were living. You don't really see too much about that. You see that there are, I guess Cain worked the land, apparently, it seems like, because that's why he brought first fruits. I guess Abel worked with animals. I don't know, they would have learned this through either God or Adam or Eve. I don't really know that part of the information. I don't know what Noah did for a living, but apparently he and his family were a different type of person. They were living in a way that was connected to God. I mean, back then they couldn't even have said the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob or whatever, or Moses or none of these. This is pre-Moses, pre-everybody, like the Ten Commandments were written like after the Exodus from Egypt. So that's not even in Genesis, because we still have to get all the way through Genesis to get through the story of Joseph. And then, at that time, the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt. And so you don't really get to see a lot of the early religion. You just hear stuff about, sacrifices. There's the part about Noah building the ark. But other than like the sacrifices and these kind of miraculous things that you see in here, and just kind of like the lineages of the people and kind of the stories that happened within those lineages, like the main story that kind of happened during, whoever's life, during Enoch's life, during Lamech's life, during Noah's life, or whatever. You kind of hear these little stories about these important figures, but you don't really know everything. You just kind of know like a story, or like a big story, or like a smaller story. Um, and some characters pop up over and over, and other ones don't. And it kind of follows this like history of a lineage of people. So if you look at things from the book of Genesis, for the most part, up until Joseph, um, and Joseph living out with his brothers and his father, and all out in the desert, when after Jacob becomes like Israel, and you know Israel has all those sons, Benjamin being the last son after Joseph. But when Joseph, yeah, basically Benjamin being the last son after Joseph, and getting sold into slavery by his brothers, and um, having all these kind of like dreams, with the having all these dreams, and the code that his father gave him, and all these different things. Like, you don't really see a lot of like traditional modern Judaism. Like, they don't talk about tefillin, they don't talk about like davening or different like prayers. They don't talk about reading of Torah portions. Like, there was no Torah portions yet. Like, there was no written religion yet. This is like the ancient phase of this religion, pre, like, I don't know if there was anything written back then, but it was like technically, I guess, pre Bible. Because the Bible doesn't happen till after, well, after Moses gets the Ten Commandments. By the time Jesus is on the earth, way back, way later on, by the time Jesus is on the earth, there's already a written Torah, to study. But there was still a lot of oral tradition as well. And the Ten Commandments were written, I guess, they were written on stone, first by God, then by Moses. And then I guess from there, you don't really hear a lot about anything. But it seems like Joseph knew how to read and write, which I don't know if I heard that from like a story, or if that actual is biblical, that Joseph knew how to read and write. But I feel like he did, because he impressed the higher ups in Egypt, and he got a position in government, and was like favored among the young men, in the kingdom or palace, or in society, that were kind of like considered like you know smart, and so yeah, like I don't know how long the span of time is with the Hebrews in Egypt, but it goes all the way till Moses frees them, and that's like a long time after. And so they had been slaves in Egypt for a really long time, and then Moses, during Moses' time, and Moses lived to be what, like 120 years old or something. Like, Moses was old. Like, I don't know at this time, like, but I think they say that his life was broken up into four different segments, three different segments of 40 years each that were like major periods of time. Because remember, they wandered in the desert for like 40 years. And so he was like 40, I guess, when he led, I think, I could be wrong on this, but I think he was about 40 when he led them out of Egypt. They wandered for 40 years. Now that wouldn't line up because he died before they entered the promised land. Um, so he would have died at 120. So then that means that, yeah. So they wandered from when he was 80 to 120 years old. That sounds excessive. I don't know. So he would have released them earlier, like gotten them released earlier. I don't really know. I can't do math right now. But anyways, um, I don't really know. I'm just trying to think about how we get some of the modern religions, because when you look back, even because the reason why for me it is easier to start in American Western society, it's kind of easier to start with looking at Judaism because Christianity is considered one of the major religions as well as Islam, and so between the three of those religions, Judaism was the first one. But I feel like people weren't really converting. Like Jews, they're I guess they weren't really like on a mission to like convert people to Judaism. Like you were born into it and you were Jewish, and that's just how it went. Um, yeah, it's not that there weren't any people that never converted, but it's not like Christianity or Islam, how like they were kind of on a mission to do that and convert people. Like I don't really know about, in history if there was a lot of like Judaism of people in Jewish culture trying to convert others. At least in the Bible, I haven't really seen that. I would say maybe I saw it. I mean, yeah, with the New Testament, of course, but that's not like modern day Judaism. That's a whole different thing. And I think the reason why it's so important to also look at paganism is because it kind of gets, once we start getting into Christianity, things start getting a little complicated because there's other cultures just being like thrown in on top of this other culture that stemmed from another culture. So it's like it just gets very interesting. But early Judaism doesn't appear to have a lot of like need for converting people. I mean, other than Noah telling I guess the wicked people of the region, to get in the ark and all that kind of stuff, like, or yeah, or other than like Moses, telling Pharaoh to let the Hebrew slaves go, to let his people go. Those are the only times where I really see anybody early in the Bible trying to be like, you need to listen to what this person says, you know. Um, I mean, there's so many different stories in the Bible, but when you look in the Bible, usually in those early Old Testament days, you don't start seeing the Jews having too much to have to do with too many other cultures until Egypt. Um, then it's like, okay, now they're enslaved, and so that's a whole different thing. And so they're enslaved for however many generations they're enslaved for, and then they flee for, I guess, a whole generation. They're, you know, in the desert wandering. I don't know if that's literal or figurative, but, they're wandering. I guess the theory is they're wandering to be able to kind of kill off a generation of people that were kind of like raised in slavery and having all these kind of like habits and things, and could basically come into a new nation of people that grew up in the that grew up not being slaves, basically. And so once they enter the promised land and Moses isn't allowed to go, and he dies, and then from there, there does seem to be a lot of warring, and there's a lot of, wars and battles and things like that. And I don't know if the reason was to convert people. Maybe it was, and I am very rusty, so I don't really know. But basically, oh man, so from the time when Moses gets the commandments through like the majority of Exodus, it's a lot of commandments. Leviticus is a whole lot more of commandments. And then in Numbers and Deuteronomy, you start getting into some more solid stories. But yeah, I don't know if, let me see. Sorry, I gotta kind of look stuff up in these Bible apps and stuff because I don't really know. So let me see. If I search Numbers, like the book of Numbers, I'll just say sorry, no books were found. It's like a whole book. Oh my goodness. They couldn't have made this any more difficult. I mean, can I just look at the Bible? Is it that hard? So okay, if I go to Numbers, the beginning of the book of Numbers, and I scroll back to the end of Leviticus, the end of Leviticus is talking still about more and more commandments. Leviticus 27 ends on votive offerings. That's the heading that I see here. And then the book of Numbers starts with the first census of Israel. And it says it's in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt. So it goes from Reuben, which was a son of, basically it goes from all of the sons of Israel, which was Joseph's dad. So all of his brothers, including Benjamin, and all of their lineages, all of their descendants, and from Levite, you have the priestly, the priestly order. So I think from there is when you start to first see more organization, like, because now they have the commandments, and they have Leviticus that has plenty of detail about the commandments of what to do and all these details of how to do every single thing. And things are kind of like militantly organized between like the Levites and the regiments and the different groups of different tribes of people and all these different encampments of all the tribes, and the sons of Aaron, their lineage, and the Levite duties, and the census of the Levites. And then it talks about the redemption of the firstborn, enrolling firstborn males of the Israelites from 1 month and upwards, and count their names. So basically adding them to the census, all the firstborn males. There's a census taken of the Kohathites, separate from the Levites, and their ancestral clans. I guess I wasn't using the right word. It's ancestral clans, not tribes. I guess the whole tribe would be the tribe of Israel. Gershonites, and their ancestral house and clans, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And then it starts talking about unclean persons, confession and restitution, concerning unlawful wife, like different types of commandments, uh, about the Nazarites, about different types of like cultural types of ways of living, I guess, that kind of is like more organized. So I feel like in Judaism, you don't really start seeing too much organization until like too much of an organized looking religion until all these rules are given to like these priestly people and like either when they're in the desert or once they're in the promised land, now they have some kind of organized look to the religion with a bunch of rules, and Passover and all these different things. um, Whereas if you compare before Exodus, you really just have like groups of people living out in the desert with their families. It doesn't say anything about them going to temple or what. They just seem to know how to do sacrifices and things. And the reason why I mention that is because a lot of ancient religions seem to be that way. A lot of ancient religions, like even the ones that I don't know what they're called, when I look at different cultures, like say, people know that I like to watch documentaries. I like to watch, about ancient. Um, it sounds like somebody's at my door. Give me a second. Oh, yeah, it looks like somebody was coming, putting things on the door. This heater's loud, but sorry, I'm gonna turn it on for a little bit before I start melting. Um, so yeah, maybe I'll go in the other room so it's not so loud. Cool thing about this hotel, it has more than one room. So yeah, this one has air too, but it's not like the whole unit. It's just a vent, so I can still hear it, but it's not as loud. So yeah. Right, let me get settled here. You gotta get settled in another place. So basically, when it comes to, what you see in the Old Testament with, the altars and the sacrificing, like you started seeing, I think since the Garden of Eden, you see a sacrifice where, after God finds Adam and Eve hiding from him in the garden after eating from the tree, after the serpent got involved with them and everything, they go and they, make clothes for themselves out of plants, and they realize that they're naked, so they do that, and then they said that they were hiding from God because they were naked, and God's like, who told you were naked? It's kind of like they didn't even have that sense of nudity or anything like that. Something changed, a lot, where they started trying to have like these deceiving things. And I don't know. I don't want to get into this right now, but I think about that story a lot because I'm like, what part was like, I don't really care honestly to like debate if sin exists and all these kind of things. I think people naturally know, regardless of what religion you are, if you're harming yourself or others, you're probably not doing the right thing. If you're not harming yourself or others, pretty much everything's up to question at that point. drums in church, are they really that evil? Is it really that bad if a woman wants to wear a tank top or drink a coffee? You know, like those types of things to me don't really seem to be as big of a deal as if you're doing right for your own self, your own health, and for others around you, and having healthy relationships, and not like being abusive and gossiping and, you know, stepping on people's toes and lying on people and, you know, doing all kinds of like just wild things. Like that's completely unnecessary. But I often wonder with Adam and Eve, when they were in the garden, what was the part that, like, it seems like there was a sequence of events that led from, like, how we're always taught, you know, we're basically always taught that the second Eve ate the apple, or not the apple, I guess it was just a fruit, but I don't know why it became an apple, but the second Eve ate the fruit, we notice that she, from that point, becomes, it says, you know, her eyes were opened, you know, Adam ate it after her. Their eyes were opened, and but was that the issue? You know, was eating it the issue? Was it the step before that where she was actually talking to the serpent and getting ideas and thinking and, like, you know, getting tricked basically from what she knows, where she says God told her, you know, don't go near the tree. And then the serpent corrects her and is like, yeah, God didn't say you can't come near the tree. He said you can't eat, you know, he said, you know, because he knows that you'll be like him, knowing good and evil. And there's some debate around Eve wanting to be like God, and that's why she ate it. Or maybe she ate it because she got tricked. Or maybe the problem was that she went against the command that God told her to not go near the tree. And God did say that they would die. I don't know if they understood what death was, because it sounds like they'd never seen a sacrifice or animal die at that point. So maybe they didn't even know what death was. And, you know, but they seem to be, you know, tempted by it. They seem to have a curiosity, even if they didn't know good from evil or whatever that means. They seem to have this curiosity, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, that's like a side issue that I kind of, I'm like, that story has like so much depth to it. Like the more I try to think on different angles of it, that I realize it's a beautifully deep story that I really like to think about on a regular basis, because I get so much like different insights and angles into things, like but anyways, all that aside, you know, you see God in the Garden of Eden, you know, killing an animal for the clothing. And I believe people say that that was considered a sacrifice for them sinning, or for their transgression, or because when somebody breaks a rule or law or something, you know, it has to be paid for with blood of a sacrifice of some innocent blemishless type of animal or something. I don't know. But sacrificing seems to be something that in the modern society that we have, it's kind of like a taboo thing. Like, I'm from a culture of people that, you know, there will be like slaughtered goats and, you know, or maybe like a calf and things like that on occasion. but it's usually for like an important traditional ceremony, like a wedding especially. It's not uncommon to have like a goat slaughtered for a wedding or something like that. Like these types of things aren't like uncommon. um, but nobody really treats it like um, something you're gonna do every day or every week. They're like, at least in my family and my culture, I don't hear people talking about like your sins or wrongdoings and like putting it on the animal, or bringing like a blemishless or an unblemished sacrifice to some kind of altar as part of a worship, a worship tradition. Like, I don't really see that in my culture as much, just more so the sacrifice or slaughter of an animal. But it's not really tied in necessarily with like a religion necessarily. Like, nobody really calls it that. Nobody's like, oh, we're practicing this and this is why we're doing that. Like, it's usually to commemorate like a very special event. um if that, like, it's not like it happens like all the time, but it's like it can happen, and if it does happen, it's usually in that scenario. um so there's that. The experience of like an event with a sacrificed animal. But I feel like, if I talk to most of my friends that don't have any kind of like ancient traditions, and everyone in their family kind of has like modern Western practices, I don't really hear of that many people in modern Western society sacrificing or slaughtering anything on their own, unless they live kind of more, like my family in the Midwest, they fish and hunt. So, of course, they're gonna, clean the animal and like prepare it and everything so you can like eat it and store it and everything. But like store like the frozen meat or whatever, or use like the animal fur or whatever it may be. Um, but where we live in the city, that's not even like an option. Like, you're not killing any animals. Um, I mean, there is stuff to kill that's not like pets, but it's not like calves or like goats or anything. It's like different kinds of birds and different kinds of like possums and raccoons and skunks and that kind of stuff. Like, like rodents. Like, we don't really have like animals in the city that would be considered like something somebody's gonna use for like some kind of real sacrifice. Like, maybe, I mean, if you're going biblical, maybe pigeons. Like, pigeons are mentioned in the Bible, but I don't know about all these other types of animals. And people aren't usually sacrificing dogs and cats and stuff either, so I don't really know. But we I don't know. We kind of would do that. We would kind of do that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I don't really know when it comes to like the Bible. I really don't see that much going on. That's actually like looking like ancient religions. But when I think about what I've learned about paganism, I don't know really the full difference between heathenry and paganism. I think they're different. I think there's asatru, pagan, and heathen, but I don't know where they overlap or what. Um, I think I had notes on that somewhere, but I don't know, what. Yeah, I think I recorded about it before. or something along those lines. But I really don't remember the details. But anyways, in pagan culture and tradition, you also see, you know, altars for sacrificing animals, or at least like some kind of form of like worship with nature involved. It can be like private or with a group of people. I feel like pagans are almost lucky that they don't really have like a written scripture necessarily. I think there's a book, I can't remember the name of it, but it doesn't sound like they use it like the Bible. Let me see. Let me look it up and see what it's called. I'm terrible with the names for these things. Let me see if I look up pagan Bible name. I don't know. I'm looking up, does paganism use a holy book? Because I think they said that there isn't one, but I don't know. It says the sacred text of paganism is not a holy book, but the natural world itself. Pantheists, polytheists, or animists, or even atheists, and yeah, it doesn't seem like there's like an actual one book. I think there is a type of book that I heard about, but I think the issue with it was that it's old. Like that it's more modern based or something. It's not like an old scripture or something that people have to follow. And I feel like that is kind of lucky, because it's like you don't get all these weird people like trying to well, you probably still do, but you don't get a bunch of people that are like, well, this book says this here, and it's like, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to kind of know, when there's a religion that has a book and there's clearly stuff in there that you're not going to do, right? There's clearly stuff in there that you're not going to do. Especially as times change and times go on, you're not going to do a lot of it. Like I just talked about Exodus and Leviticus, and some of Numbers. There's a bunch of stuff in there that, if somebody becomes a Christian, they're not going to look back at Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and start looking at all these commandments and start just trying to do every single thing. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, some of it, you would never be able to live like a normal Western person. Like, you'd be like sacrificing all these animals, and you'd have to basically have a herd of animals and be like, or buying like full on animals, or catching them, or trapping them, or whatever. Like, you'd have to live somewhere where you could get access to animals to sacrifice. You'd have to follow all these laws and rules of things that are so ancient that there's some stuff that like just people don't do that anymore, and so it would just be a little bit complicated. And I know there are people that say like, oh, like nobody does this anymore because the most holy place and the temple and all these kind of things, like the temple doesn't exist anymore, so these sacrifices can't be made because that's the only place. Or like, the Christian perspective is more so like, that the new does away with a lot of, like with Jesus being sacrificed, does away with a lot of the other stuff, and like having to be done, and I don't know. There's just all these ideas that are just so confusing when you start getting like a written text. It's like you can spend a lot of time thinking about like what does that actually mean versus like going with your experience with what happens when you worship or what happens when you do some kind of like praying and worshiping and some kind of like thing that's sacred between you and your God or multiple gods or whatever it is, like that you're worshiping, or whoever it is that you're worshiping, like, I think it gets a little bit lost in, having like these scriptures and things, because you can want to like dive into it and be so just like knowledgeable, like the intellectual side of it versus like the side that appeals more to your senses and your, the way you feel emotionally and those types of things. It's more like I read it and there's a very cognitive, like this is what it says, but you can get passionate about your opinions and things, but I feel like sometimes that can get in the way if you're really trying to like worship or something. It's like, I think sometimes, at least for me, in my own upbringing and history with, religious practice, I always felt sometimes things would get in the way. It's like you could have a really great service where there's, the worship music really gets people feeling like a different like emotional sense and a different energy, and then somebody comes in with some sermon that just brings you down and makes you feel bad about yourself or whatever, and it's like, I didn't come here for this, you know what I mean? But I know people talk a lot about conviction and all this kind of stuff, but it's like, I often wonder, if there is some benefit to, these other types of ancient religions that don't have those books, or religions that don't have books that, people want to fight about and stuff. It's like, to me sometimes I'm like, this is so pointless to have these like debates and arguing about all kinds of stupid things that it's just like why would somebody want to spend their weekend doing that with people in a place where it's like a congregation of people getting together to debate a book? It's kind of like weird, and people leave with like hurt feelings and don't really like, they get like upset with one another, and it's like, I don't really feel like that is like a style of worship. It's like, why do people do that? Or why do people go in and start like, just because they have a microphone, now they want to bash their whole congregation? Like, I do understand if there's like some kind of social issue coming up in a congregation of people, and it's like there's somebody who's like causing chaos, and of course I think that should be handled privately. But if it becomes like a problem where there's like a lot of it going on, and I think it makes sense for like a pastor or somebody to like, just be like, it's not okay for people to be behaving like this, because you're hurting other people's feelings. But I think it gets a little tricky when it's like they start going a whole other level past that, and they're like, well, you can't eat this meat anymore, and I don't want to see you buying this on this day, and I don't want to see you doing this, and it's very like based in like, are you following the rules? And if you get caught breaking them, you experience a sense of shame, especially if somebody's calling it out, or a sense of guilt. I don't think that should be something that a clergy person in a church or in a religion, or some person in a leadership role should have to be constantly talking about. I feel like when it comes to those things, those should be personal things that the individual person worshiping deals with on their own spare time, And, I don't really think sermons are always necessary. Um, but that's kind of the flow of church. You can't really have, I've never heard of a church that doesn't have sermons. I mean, maybe they exist, but I can't imagine, like, a church not having a sermon. And then, a lot of times they have tithes and offerings and stuff. And the Bible does talk about tithing. Jesus talks about it too, as like an act of worship. And there's all these types of acts of worship that you're told are things to do as acts of worship. Um, but then on top of that, there's other stuff that's like the book says to do this or not do this other thing. These other like commandments that aren't necessarily like part of a ritual or anything. So I don't know. I wonder about that. I often kind of get curious about that kind of thing. And yeah. Yeah, I don't have like way too much to say about it anymore, about more of it, but yeah, when it comes to like ancient religions, that is one thing that I kind of was looking at, the crossover, is that it does seem like there's a lot of ancient traditions. Like if you look in like the Arab culture, if you look in like Asian cultures, if you look in ancient like African cultures, a lot of cultures in what's now North America, South America, um, all around the world, you see a lot of traditions where there's altars, sacrifices, and different kind of rituals going on, but you don't see a lot of written books, texts that's like, this person said to do this and it's written down in that way, so we're just going to do this for all eternity because somebody wrote it down and said that this is what we have to do. And then we're going to get together once a week and talk about it a lot and decide on how we're going to all do it. We're going to all have to follow the same exact thing that the pastor or whoever says we have to follow. And each church to church, even within a denomination or a sect, each religious group gathering can still be different. They might believe different things, like for example in Adventism you have really conservative Adventists, the people who, when you go to their churches you have to dress a certain way, you have to read hymns, and they don't have, well, you sing hymns, and they might have like a piano or an organ, they rarely have drums. It's very like solemn, kind of old school type church music. Like at the most you'll have like microphones set up, or maybe someone on a tambourine or something, but usually it's not, a lot of instruments allowed. Like they usually have like a problem with some types of music and stuff like that, versus other places where it's like it's almost like a rock concert or like a gospel concert or something. Like the music is like pretty upbeat, and I think I mean I don't know if I can really get into it in this episode fully, but I do think music has a very strong force to it. I've always kind of thought that. I've noticed it. I've felt it. I've definitely noticed how it can change a lot of things, like I'll talk about it maybe in another episode because I don't have a lot of thoughts on it directly right now, and then I'll end this one. But basically, when I was a kid, I was a pretty sensitive kid for sure, and was like kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, paranoid, hypervigilant, as a kid. Like, not really like somebody's gonna get me, or like there's monsters under my bed, but just kind of like, I wasn't too sure about what I was sensing sometimes at night. and I never slept well. And, you know, I don't think that ever fully went away, but I think now I'm kind of usually more so at um, like this is just part of my daily journey kind of thing. I don't ignore it, but I don't get like super afraid. Like I would say when I was a kid, I used to get kind of like fearful of like sensing different things. I really don't know how to explain it. That's the best I can explain it. And I knew that like music would help for it to go away. Like I felt really calm when I would listen to music at night. So I would listen to music. I would turn on my little radio. Usually I had like church sermons on or like something like that. But or I had like jazz music. I think in LA it's 88.1, just like the jazz music station, and I would just play jazz music in the background all day. And it was pretty chill, and I liked it, and it was pretty simple to do, and I was enjoying myself. And yeah, you know, I would fall asleep more easily then, and um, yeah, like when I'm fully awake, music, sound in general is very powerful. Um, so I know a lot of times it's incorporated in a lot of different religions, uh, and a lot of people, and depending on what they believe in their religion, would probably say that there's certain types of music that's considered more okay than other types of music, but overall, I guess if you get the theme right, you're okay. Um, but also, like, the type of music you're singing, I guess, according to the religion, is supposed to be like, or the denomination or whatever, usually needs to be like on a certain theme. You know, it's kind of taboo to kind of bring in other types of music, and they'll be like, "Whoa, like what is this? Like, this isn't our style of worship music," Um, so I'd say usually there's some kind of music. I don't know what Quakers do, but usually there's some kind of music. There's usually some kind of prayer and some type of speaking um, of some kind. And usually that's all it really takes to have a religious service for the most part. It doesn't need to be like super organized. Um, you know, the New Testament talks about, with prayer, if two or more come together. I think in Jewish culture, 8 is considered a minyan. I think, I don't know in Islam if there's a certain amount of people that you have to have for like different prayer, like not that you have to have, but that you would prefer to have when it comes to like prayer and stuff like that. But I don't really see too many other, like, I'm not saying people shouldn't read the Bible or don't read it or don't have a religion. I'm just saying when you take like a religious text out of the picture, all the religions seem to kind of have that kind of stuff in common. Even without the books involved, you still have those basic frames going on. Um, and just different kind of rituals and stuff that happen the day that there's the service or during the week and different stuff like that. So I don't really know. Like, that's mostly my thoughts on that. But I want to talk more about modern religions too. Something that I've noticed is different from like the ancient traditions of things, because I feel like it's really important to note. Um, yeah, but I don't really know for sure. But okay, I'll see if I attach a daily episode to the end of this one. If not, it's because the daily episode is maybe long. I'll keep it separate because I try not to make these like over 90 minutes. Like, an hour is pushing it, so once it starts to get like close to 90 minutes, I don't want to tag on a separate hour of just like daily rant. So yeah, I'm going to end this one for now. And with that, thanks for listening.